Well, thank you very much. Appreciate our witnesses for being here this morning and discuss the very important matter of broadcast ownership. The effort to regulate media ownership, ensuring the broadcast industry remains competitive and meets the information needs of local communities. However, the FCC has failed a mandatory review of current rules governing this dynamic marketplace. As a result, longtime industry participants, the rules and regulations are placed at competitive disadvantage as newer market entrants who are afforded greater flexibility to compete by the internet. Ignoring the need to make media ownership rules more relevant only hurts the industry and public interest. We need updated law for the 21st century communications landscape. I look forward to today's witnesses talking about the current regulatory framework governing broadcast impact that is having on businesses, consumers, and on the economy. And with that, I'm going to yield my time, and I will now recognize from California, the ranking member of the subcommittee.
Thank you, Mr. Latta. I appreciate it. I just want to make a comment. Yesterday was a day filled with joy in the Congress. We welcomed the historic visit of Pope Francis. I think today is a sad day with the news of John Boehner announcing that he's stepping down as Speaker. He has my respect and my gratitude for what he has done over the years in the Congress. Mr. Chairman, a digital content revolution is underway. Thanks to the power of broadband, millions of Americans are using social media and over-the-top video services for original content, news, entertainment, and sports. A consumer can Hulu the last episode of Glee, Netflix, House of Cards, or stream Major League Baseball games over Apple TV. There's no doubt the media landscape is rapidly changing, but consumers continue to rely on traditional bastions of 20th century media, including broadcast, radio, and newspaper for local news, public information, and weather. Consistent with the goals of the Communications Act, our subcommittee, the FCC, should remain focused on promoting localism, advancing competition, and encouraging diversity across all content platforms. A lack of diversity in particular continues to plague the industry. Data reported by the FCC shows that just 3% of broadcast TV licenses are held by people of color. Similar challenges exist among the highest ranked management, with just 4% of TV networks and studios led by minorities. A 21st century broadcast system should reach of our country. This is not only the right thing to do, it's good business as well. And this is clearly an area where little we know that nothing we deal with has easy answers, but one thing is certain: relaxing the FCC's media ownership rules for increased industry consolidation, which does, in my view, nothing to promote localism, competition, or diversity. And I think of our democracy, where we believe there should be many voices to the many and not fewer. I had a much statement, but given the beginning the hearing later, I will yield back, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And thank you to the witnesses for being here.
Gentlelady yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Shimkus.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome to the subcommittee. We're in Washington, where once you think you got it figured out, stuff changes. So I want to thank the ranking member of the subcommittee for her, focus and see a big issue that's going on here in the House and also Republican conference. We'll miss John. So wrap ourselves around your testimony and the issue at hand, but please, especially for folks on this side and probably on both, there's a lot of other thoughts going through a lot of my colleagues' minds right now, and we'll try to drag them back to this hearing as soon as possible. So with that, I yield back my time.
The gentleman yields back, and the chair now recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey, the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Pallone, for 5 minutes.
I'm going to try to limit it to 2, Mr. Chairman. It's easy to say the ways we get news and information is changing. That's certainly true, but it's equally true that we continue to broadcast TV and radio, and that means a diversity of voices over the air remains essential. Some say that we should overlook the need for diverse voices because the broadcast must consolidate if it's going to survive, but the fact is broadcasters are thriving even without consolidation. The data speaks for itself. The radio industry last year advertising revenue to the tune of nearly $15 billion. TV broadcasters earned $20 billion from on-air ads in 2014. Billions of dollars in ad buying helped drive this total, and that number will likely skyrocket with the upcoming 2016 presidential election cycle. The FCC must continue to serve as a sentinel, protecting the ideals of localism, diversity of ownership, and diversity of viewpoint. And given the impact of political ads, the Commission also has an obligation to make sure the public knows who's spending that money to control their airwaves. We do not need to look any further than my home state of New Jersey to see what can happen when consolidation goes. Nearly 9 million New Jerseyans are forced to rely on mostly out-of-state stations for news and information. One of the few New Jersey stations we do have is part of owns 3 TV stations in the New York market, and this station still does not serve adequate news about New Jersey for our local residents. So again, I'm pleased with these issues, and I look forward to the testimony. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Gentleman yields back. And at this time, on behalf of I want to thank all of our panelists for being here today. We greatly appreciate you being here and your testimony. And at this time, the chair, Mr. Gerald Waldron of the National Association of Broadcasters for 5 minutes. Thanks very much. And just turn that mic on and start. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Latta, Ranking Member Eshoo, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Jerry Waldron. I'm a partner at the law firm of Covington & Burling. I'm pleased to be here today on behalf of the National Association of Broadcasters. The FCC's broadcast ownership rules were adopted with the stated purpose of fostering 3 long-standing policy goals: competition, localism, and diversity of voices. But an honest assessment of the current video environment shows these rules fail to advance any of those objectives. I want to make 3 points for your consideration. First, the current ownership rules actually inhibit rather than promote broadcasters' ability to compete in a vibrant video marketplace. Second, as a result, these rules undermine broadcasters' uniquely local focus. And third, the rules actually fail to promote diversity. The broadcast ownership rules do not serve the public interest because they are simply out of touch with the reality of today's media landscape. These days, watching TV frequently does not mean watching the big screen in your living room. Consumers are increasingly likely to turn instead to their laptops or tablets. Millennials do not necessarily watch channels. Rather, they consume programs whenever they want and wherever they may be. Consumers create their own content packages through services such as Amazon Instant Video, Hulu, and Netflix. The risk of a powerful broadcast owner, Kane, if you will, that drove the creation of the broadcast ownership rules in the 1970s is not just unlikely, it is almost non-existent. The landscape is simply too diverse and evolving too quickly, both with regard to content creation and content distribution, to justify the current rules. Against that backdrop, the FCC's rules pick winners and losers in this new media landscape. They limit broadcast ability to compete with the cable, satellite, and online media outlets that face no comparable restrictions. As a result, these competitors have grown and have taken away both audience share and advertising revenue from traditional broadcasters. The reality is that today, broadcasters' main competition for advertising dollars comes from companies such as Google and Facebook, the newly merged AT&T DirecTV, and cable companies like the soon Time Warner. I bring this information to the committee's attention not to complain about competition, but rather to underscore that the FCC rules pretend this competition does not exist. My second point is that while the FCC's rules should be promoting localism, the opposite effect. A healthy, vibrant broadcast industry serves the public interest through locally focused news, sports, public affairs programs, and emergency services. No other industry has that responsibility. and most importantly, the ability or incentive to serve the needs of the public. Yet the broadcast ownership rules act to inhibit broadcasters' ability to serve this basic responsibility by limiting investment and synergy that otherwise fuel locally focused programming. To maintain the ability to provide quality local service, the FCC's ownership rules permit reasonable combination of station ownership. Broadcasters are a critical source of information and entertainment in every community across the country, but significant resources to provide up-to-the-minute news, local and national emergency information, and highly valued entertainment program. To compete and serve their communities successfully, broadcasters should be governed by regulations that at least account for the new and varied competition that is all around us. Finally, the record is clear that the current rules have failed to promote minority ownership of broadcast properties, and yet support for these rules is sometimes justified on diversity grounds. NAB has long supported the goal of diversity among broadcast stations. To that end, supports the reinstatement of a tax certificate program. But our industry is not alone in having a great deal of room for improvement. However, ownership rules that are out of step with today's competitive reality only suffocate smaller broadcasters and limit new entrants. In conclusion, we are asking Congress for help to hold the FCC accountable for completing its review of the rules and making the necessary changes to the benefit of both communities and consumers across the country. I thank you for your attention to this important issue and look forward to your questions.
Testimony, and the chair now recognizes Mr. Boyle, who is Vice President of the Public Policy Newspaper Association of America. I appreciate you being here today, and thank you for your testimony.
Vice Chairman Latta, Ranking Member Eshoo, and members of the subcommittee, on behalf of my 2000, thank you for this opportunity to testify. Congress and the administration have long been concerned about the future of newspaper journalism as our industry adjusts to realities. The challenges that newspapers face today are well documented. For the most part, these challenges are market-driven. The one is the FCC's ban on cross-ownership that prohibits investors from owning or investing in both a daily newspaper and a television in the same market. The rule may have been reasonable and appropriate in 1975, but with the surge across multiple platforms, cable, satellite TV, satellite radio, and the internet, the cross-ownership ban no longer makes sense. Today, the American public has access to more information and more viewpoints than ever before, including through new digital platforms. As the Pew Project for Excellence in Journalism summarized in its State of the News Media report, the pace of technology and the multiplicity of choices from platforms to devices to pathways show no sign of slowing down. Significant resources of their own on digital and mobile platforms and applications, providing consumers with news and how, when, and where they want it. Most newspapers are also providing video to enhance news reports and in-depth features, videos that closely mirror the work of traditional broadcasters. For example, the New York Times received a prize for a multimedia project about skiers killed in an avalanche and the science of such disasters, and received an Emmy for documentaries that live exclusively online. The point is, media companies embrace digital and mobile platforms. Yet, the FCC is desperately holding on to a media ownership rule that was constructed. The FCC's cross-ownership ban is not only outdated, it is stifling much-needed investment in newspapers. Since 2008, newspapers has decreased by 55%. Yes, digital advertising is a growing source of revenue, only produces a fraction of the resources that newspapers have historically relied upon to sustain their newsrooms. In 1996, Congress required its media ownership rules every 4 years, and to repeal or modify any rule that is no longer in the public interest. The FCC has consistently ignored this directive. As this commission continues to delay, this ban on cross-ownership is much further removed from the reality of today's media marketplace. In fact, the FCC inaction has contributed to the decision by some media companies to either sell their broadcast stations or to divide their publishing and broadcast properties. After 20 years of waiting for regulatory relief, many media companies have moved on from cross-ownership as a strategy. These actions do not mean that the rule is irrelevant. Local newspapers will come on the market, and there will be situations where the most logical buyer is a broadcaster who shares a commitment to local journalism. And there will be a daily newspaper interested in buying a TV station so that it can diversify its revenue stream in support of journalism. But let's be clear, the repeal of the cross-ownership ban will not lead to massive consolidation. More likely, mergers would occur in a few select markets where it makes economic sense and where there are synergies that would support local journalism. Finally, because of the scope of this hearing includes diversity of ownership in the broadcast industry, I would like to point out that NAA has consistently supported many of the diversity proposals put forward by MMTC and others, such as the incubator program and a reinstatement of the minority tax certificate. In the past, some have argued that the FCC should not change the cross-ownership ban until the Commission takes certain steps to increase diversity in media. We believe the Commission is fully capable of doing both at the same time. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for your testimony, and the chair now recognizes Kim Keenan, President and CEO of the Multicultural Media, Telecom, and Internet Council. Thank you very much, and you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Vice Chairman Latta, Ranking Member Eshoo, distinguished members of the subcommittee, and esteemed colleagues on the panel. I am honored to appear today to address the nation's efforts to promote and preserve opportunities for diversity in the ownership of our nation's airwaves. My name is Kim Keenan, and I do serve as President and CEO of MMTC, or Multicultural Media, Telecom, and Internet Council. This nonprofit was founded 29 years ago to promote equal opportunity and social justice in mass media, telecommunications, and the broadband industries. We proudly partner with dozens of national and local civil rights and advocacy organizations. In an effort to do our part to increase minority broadcast ownership, MMTC's nonprofit media and telecom brokerage division has participated in nearly 1/3 of all broadcast station sales to women and people of color since 1997. At MMTC, we believe that consistent with the mandate of Sections 151, 257, and 309 of the Communications Act, our nation's media must reflect the cultural and viewpoint diversity of our nation. The late Dr. Everett C. Parker was one of our co-founders and a minister of the United Church of Christ. He passed away last week at the age of 102. And he worked very hard to desegregate both radio and television stations. Why? He said, if we want the voiceless to have a voice everyone can hear, we must have a robust minority broadcast ownership. It is essential to our democracy. This message of advancing diverse media still resonates at MMTC, and other media advocates push for equity and representation and participation in the industry. So for this hearing, I want to focus on 3 things. First, the FCC has not been proactive in advancing minority broadcast ownership. First, the FCC must swiftly act upon proposals and policies that address the market entry barriers that limit diversity and inclusion in broadcasting. The FCC has 4 decades of minority ownership jurisprudence. In response to a 1973 court decision, the FCC began to consider minority ownership as a factor in comparative broadcast hearings. It followed that decision in 1978 with the famous tax certificate policy, which until its repeal in 1995 quintupled the number of bona fide minority-owned broadcast stations. Unfortunately, since 1978, the FCC's activity regarding minority ownership has been marked by inconsistently applied policies and, in some cases, repeal of minority ownership initiatives without the implementation of new or alternative approaches. In the FCC's most recent media ownership report issued in 2014 and reporting on October through 2013 data, people of color, including Hispanics, held a majority voting interest in only 6% of full-power commercial television stations, 11.2% of commercial AM stations, and 0.2% of commercial FM stations. And because these stations are mostly small and underpowered, MMTC estimates that they represent no more than 2% of broadcast industry assets as a whole. It is well settled that this is an indispensable element of broadcast ownership diversity. And one of the other things that the FCC did under Michael Powell in 2004 was to create the Advisory Committee on Diversity for Communications and Age to advance media ownership opportunities for minorities and women. For our part, MMTC, joined by over 50 national rights professional and civic organizations, has placed before the FCC some 44 race-neutral and almost entirely deregulatory proposals for rule changes and legislative recommendations that would advance minority ownership and participation in broadcasting. Despite clear interest in promoting ownership by women and minorities, the Advisory Committee on Diversity has not met since September 17, 2013. The last 57 market entry barriers report to Congress was due December 31, 2012. The FCC rejected 23 of MMTC's 4 pending proposals with no analysis or consideration in the 2014 quadrennial report and order on the theory that they were beyond the scope of the 2014 rulemaking. In 2004 and again in 2011, the Third Circuit Court of Appeals had commanded the agency pro-diversity proposals as a part of the quadrennial process. MMTC had to go to court to compel the FCC to simply rule mostly unopposed proposals that have been pending for over a decade. To be fair, the FCC took a significant action in its foreign broadcast investment policy, an action that MMTC immediately lauded. Yet, the agency had all of the other diversity proposals presented to it and has been consistently tardy in issuing the congressionally mandated Section 257 reports regarding the status of minority ownership. My time is running short. I want to make sure I make both of my final points. Reform must continue on JSAs and SSAs to ensure that they promote meaningful ownership opportunities for minorities. We applaud their long overdue crackdown on television joint service agreements, JSAs, and shared service agreements, sometimes called sidecars. They allow one station to sell advertising for or operate another station in the same market. These arrangements have almost always been used to evade the TV duopoly rule. Although a handful of those selected to operate sidecars happen to be minorities, these arrangements do not help people of color advance in broadcasting. As a practical matter, most sidecar licensees own 100% of nothing. For decades before sidecars were, women and people of color actually operated real television stations successfully. The owners hired the staff and chose to address and put on local programs to address issues. We should note that there are rare instances where a JSA or an SSA can affect a legitimate purpose, and an example is Tougaloo College's WLOO-TV, which was donated to the college by Raycom Media and is owned and operated by the college to train mass communications. The student is a JSA with American Spirit's WDBD-TV. Finally, I think this is the most important. The FCC has an immediate opportunity to foster minority media ownership through its broader efforts to revitalize radio. Pending before the FCC is the proposal to create an AM-only window to allow AM stations to apply for FM transmissions as a part of this proceeding. Last month, in an unprecedented mass letter...
Pardon me, Ms. Keenan, if you could wrap up, because I know they're going to be calling votes here real quick. So if you could just wrap up in about seconds.
Excellent, I will do that. Giving this, 12 members of Congress of the Congressional Black Caucus have written to the Chairman Wheeler urging the Commission to open the AM-only transistor radio window. I respectfully urge other members of Congress to follow suit and help guarantee that AM stations obtain the translators they need to obtain competitive and provide our communities with the service that they need. We respectfully implore the subcommittee to exercise their oversight powers to ensure that the FCC makes up for lost ground and takes dramatic and timely steps to increase minority broadcast ownership. Thank you.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Michael Scirotto, who's the Vice President of Hispanic Media Coalition. Thank you very much. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Vice Chairman Latta, Ranking Member Eshoo, members of the subcommittee, thank you very much today on this important issue of broadcast ownership in the 21st century. Broadcasting remains incredibly important in today's media landscape, yet despite an increasingly diverse population and near universal recognition of the importance of broadcast ownership, people of women remain shut out. For many years, the National Hispanic Media Coalition has issued a number of recommendations that we think would help remedy this. First, the FCC should tighten and enforce its existing media ownership rules to create opportunities. Recent action to close the joint sales agreement loophole demonstrated how further and long overdue action on this recommendation can create positive change. Second, the FCC should aggressively improve its collection of ownership data and perform analysis that's necessary to create proactive policies that promote diversity. And third, Congress should create the minority tax certificate, which increased ownership diversity before being abandoned many years ago. Promoting ownership diversity in broadcast, given the role of the media in fostering public discourse on critical issues and providing important local news and information. The FCC also has a statutory obligation. Broadcasting remains the way that most people in this country access important local news and information. Broadcast television reaches 98%. Radio is similarly pervasive. In Los Angeles, over 95% of the population listens to radio on a given week, including 98% of Latino, Spanish-speaking Latinos. However, excessive consolidation and lack of diversity has caused harm to diverse communities and prevented these communities from fully public resource that broadcasters use to serve them. Last year, before this subcommittee, NHMC compellingly recounted the harms of hate speech in the media. Examples from the past few weeks show that this problem remains. For instance, one host on a conglomerate-owned station in Iowa recently suggested that all undocumented immigrants be enslaved. Additionally, the repeated broadcast of the hateful remarks of a high-profile public figure was recently revealed to be directly responsible for the violent and vicious beating and degradation of a Latino in Boston. While internet access holds great promise for two key reasons, it is not yet able to match the power of broadcasting. First, as many as 1 in 3 Americans lack home broadband access. People living in rural areas, people of color, the poor, seniors, non-English speakers, and people with disabilities are far less likely to access the internet at home. Second, local news and information online still, by and large, originates from traditional media sources, such as local newspapers and broadcasters. The FCC's latest diversity statistics are shameful. There are more than 1,300 full-power television stations in this country. In 2013, African Americans held a majority interest in only 9. By early 2014, only 4. Many of those entangled in JSAs and other arrangements that limit control or wealth generation potential. For Asians, the number of stations owned is 5. Latinos held a majority interest in only 3% of full-power television stations in 2013, despite accounting for 17% of the population. Female ownership continues to remain low or decrease. Women owned only 6.3% of full-power commercial television stations in 2013, and radio, once considered a key entry point for diverse broadcasters, presents a similarly bleak picture. There was a 20% decrease in African American owners and a 10% decrease in Asian owners between 2011 and 2013. These numbers are persistently bad at a time when nearly 38% of the population is comprised of people of color, and they have remained bad for quite some time. There's a strong possibility that these numbers could decline further following the upcoming incentive auction. NHMC envisions a world in which broadcasters reflect the diversity of our population and adequately serve the needs of all communities. Congress should promote diversity in broadcasting by encouraging the FCC to strengthen its media ownership rules, and perform the research and analysis necessary to create new diversity initiatives. Congress should also reinstate the minority tax certificate. These are important steps towards achieving NHMC's vision. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Well, thank you very much. And the chair now recognizes for 5 minutes Mr. Todd O'Boyle, who is the Program Director of Democracy Reform Initiative at Common Cause. Thanks very much. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Mr. Vice Chairman, Ranking Member Eshoo, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting me to be a part of this discussion about the future of broadcast ownership. Former FCC Commissioner Michael Copps leads our media reform work at Common Cause, and he sends his warmest regards. At Common Cause, we advocate for inclusive, responsive governance and a diverse local media system that informs the electorate. Therefore, we oppose further relaxation of media ownership rules and support the unwinding of shell operations that undermine civic discourse. Waves of mergers and consolidations, too often with the blessing of the Federal Communications Commission, have eroded the vitality of local communications media and of our electorate. In recognition of the special compact at the heart of broadcasting, Congress wisely empowered the FCC to prevent local monopolies. Indeed, the diversity of voices enlivens the marketplace of ideas on which democracy depends. In competition for news-gathering resources, as rival news crews hustle to get the scoop, more local journalists, in turn, means more sunlight, the best disinfectant for corruption and graft. Journalism increases employment and enhances the quality and quantity of news, a win, win, win. But the inverse is also true. Consolidating, the record is grim. The FCC has for many years sanctioned merger after merger, formally entrenching local information monopolies. This has been a bipartisan problem that has facilitated an arms race between big cable and big broadcast at the expense of audiences everywhere. Meanwhile, they look the other way as media monopolists found and exploited loopholes to effect a covert consolidation through shared services and joint sales agreements. Diverse and female ownership took a nosedive. Is it any surprise that minorities and women still struggle with backwards portrayals in the media when they control so little of it? Ownership matters. There is scant evidence that these arrangements promote the public interest, and reams of data that they harm it. Recently, found that SSAs resulted in duplicated content in every market they studied. They found stations sharing anchors, graphics, scripts. In some markets, such as Honolulu, broadcasters simply simulcast the exact same content on multiple channels. In short, more shells means fewer journalists and less journalism. While we are disappointed the FCC has not yet reined in SSAs, thankfully the agency has addressed JSAs. Last year, Common Cause applauded when the Commission took an important first step back to media diversity. It brought more parity between radio and television broadcasters by making joint sales agreements attributable in ownership calculations. Within months of the FCC's action, the agency reported 10 new minority female ownership arrangements, the first meaningful gains in years. This represented a great first step, but should be viewed as only the beginning of pro-diversity reforms. Indeed, the FCC's own ownership data paint a dire picture. Female minority ownership still lags in the single digits. Broadcasters frequently defend these tricks of the trade as essential to keeping the lights on. They often claim that without these financial instruments, broadcasters would go dark. On the contrary, the bevy of recently announced mergers illustrates that broadcast business is booming, thanks to record ad sales, the bulk of which come from political advertising. Presently, Congress is considering legislative vehicles to eliminate JSA reform. We call on you to halt them forthwith. A reversal would be a staggering step backwards and foreclose future pro-local, pro-diversity policies. Indeed, the rule in question includes a waiver process so broadcasters can make the case to keep these arrangements if they truly are serving the public interest. And there are other areas where the FCC could improve. We've long urged the agency to do a better job of collecting ownership data with Form 323. The reporting tool itself is cumbersome, and the agency has been known to grant extension after extension, rendering the underlying data of questionable quality. Notably, the courts twice previously rejected attempts to relax cross-ownership rules, citing insufficient record on ownership and how proposed changes would affect historically disadvantaged groups. Regardless of where each of us stand on ownership, any change would require more and better data. I close with this observation. The present moment is one of opportunity. Will the FCC, with your oversight, approve another slew of broadcast consolidations? Or will it go down a different path, one of diverse voices and an informed electorate, the path of local and diverse ownership. Let's hope it seizes the opportunities before it, first by putting the brakes on media consolidation, and then by building on its JSA reform to rein in SSA abuses. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Well, thank you very much, and appreciate your testimony. Our next witness is Jason Kent, is the Chief Executive Officer, Digital Content Next. We appreciate you being here, and you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Vice Chairman Latta, Ranking Member SU, and the members of the subcommittee, it is my honor to appear here before you today. I'm the CEO of Digital Content Next, DCN, formerly known as the Online Publishers Association. We're the only trade group dedicated to serving high-quality digital content companies that manage trusted relationships with both consumers and advertisers. By way of background, I've spent over 20 years in digital media in a number of executive roles operating both established and native digital companies and brands. Much of that work involves shifting these brands into multi-platform brands in a short period of time based on consumer demand. I am proud now to represent media companies from every segment of the market, from large to mid-sized companies to newer upstarts that are carving out niche markets in the delivery of original content over the internet. The members of DCN reached 230 million unique visitors, over 100% of the US online population, and they are leading the evolution of the marketplace. In the late 1990s, consumers turned to the disruptive power of the internet because of the ease of access to content and the availability of this content on new platforms. As we've all witnessed over the course of nearly 2 decades since the beginning of this transformation, the current media landscape looks vastly different than it once did. When we examine where consumers turn for news and information, even more consumers are now turning online. In my full testimony, I provided some data on this transition, but I'd like to highlight 2 important findings here. According to a 2015 Reuters digital news report, 74% of respondents got their news online, compared to 64% on television, 26% on radio, and just 23% from print. If you look at the under 35 audience, less than 25% still get news from television. These statistics inform the debate. The underlying intent of the media ownership rules is to ensure a diversity of independent voices is available to consumers. However, the rules have also served to limit investment in media companies, which for newspapers in particular has made their transition to a digital world much more difficult. At its core, the internet is an innovative and important open platform that has produced a diverse ecosystem that allows businesses small and large to engage with consumers in a variety of ways, limited only by their creative capacity. It allowed a variety of consumer and professional voices to flourish. Recognition of what the internet delivers and its potential is critical to analyzing the media. I understand that developing the rules in this environment is difficult. On the one hand, consumers are increasingly moving online for their news and entertainment, as demonstrated by the data I previously shared. On the other hand, broadband adoption to access that content is not ubiquitous yet, although that is changing. Moreover, there's been a decades-long decline in ad revenue for newspapers that digital ad revenue has not offset. That decline has resulted in job cuts and other reductions in their available news resources. However, there are new digital native news sites providing coverage from a variety of perspectives. Pew estimates new native digital news sites now exist. Of course, others suggest that absent the ownership rules, the growth in digital news sites may have been easy. Balancing these competing data points and many others that speak to the levels of competition, localism, and diversity in media should provide an impetus for the FCC. What modifications to the media ownership rules should be made to reflect the new reality? In a digital age, consumers have even more access to it than 20 years ago. DCN's members have been at the forefront of this change. We have venerable institutions attempting to reform their business model, trusted brands to this digital ecosystem. We also have new digital native companies challenging the assumptions covered and delivered. The internet has been the great equalizer as content creators are able to access markets on a global scale while still having the markets with original and compelling content. As any DCN member can tell you, there is no business model that can succeed long-term without being built around the consumer. It should be no different in this case. It starts with the consumers. The key to any assessment of media ownership rules should be rooted in the answer to this question. Are consumers content they want, And are those business models sustainable? My answer is that they are, and that the offerings and offerers continue to proliferate, and ultimately consumers, that the Commission update and relax the ownership rules to reflect the media landscape as it exists today. I fear that expansions to the online environment could stunt the growth of online content in a way that will prove detrimental to the consumer experience. DCN looks forward to engaging with policymakers and regulators on this issue, and I thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today.
Well, thank you very much for your testimony. We appreciate it. And in the interest of where we are right now, because we're almost at the end of this first vote, we're going to recess the committee, at the subcommittee at this time, and committee staff will be back with you because with all the other events that have happened today, probably we won't have members coming back in. So what we'll do, we'll recess the hearing and then be back in touch with you all as to furthering the committee hearing at that time. We appreciate your testimony, and I'm sorry, the lady from California.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What I'd like to suggest, given 11 votes coming up, and we're very late for the first one, and the importance of the testimony and the issues that are embedded in the testimony, I would request that this be continued until a date certain is set, rather than members just submitting questions.
Right.
Witnesses, I really think we need to have an exchange, and it
And,
would be a healthy and worthy one. So that's the preference on this side. That could be honored.
So I think,
Thank you.
I think what we can do with our both committee staffs will work to get that put together.
Good.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
And
thank
again,
you
we
to the
appreciate your time this morning, and we'll recess the committee at this time.